The question now is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Intelligence and Security Bill, second reading.
This bill is set down for committee stage next sitting day. Call on Government Order of the Day number 2.
Taxation annual rates for 2016-17, closely held companies and remedial matters bill, interrupted debate on second reading.
Members, when we were last debating the second reading of this bill, Grant Robertson had the call and has 4 minutes remaining to speak. I call Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. 4 minutes. Look, I think an extra 13 seconds is well merited on this piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, when I was last debating this the other evening, I had mainly covered the broader issues around our concerns about ad hoc tax legislation and the spectre of having to revise and amend legislation that the House had only passed a matter of months ago, and our concerns on that, and also the question that this piece of legislation actually sets New Zealanders' annual tax rates for the 2016-17 year, which is actually nearly over. And the government has not quite managed to get this bill in front of the House till now. We are debating the second reading today, and I suspect by the time we get through the committee stages and the third reading, we'll be pushing through April, and so that'll just be a couple of months where the tax rates that New Zealanders have actually been paying this year will have been legislated for. I'll leave those viewers and listeners to make their own mind up as to what that says about the levels of organisation within the government, particularly within the management of the House. Mr. Speaker, I do just want to refer very briefly to a couple of the substantive issues in the bill that the committee dealt with, and I just want to acknowledge on this occasion, because I know I'm not supposed to say this, but because he wasn't here the other evening when we began the second reading, the former chair of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, David Bennett, who really did shepherd this piece of legislation through its work, and you know, we do miss him. Chris Bishop gave a speech that David Bennett just wouldn't have given in this House the other night, and I'll also leave that up to listeners to decide what that means as well. But I do acknowledge Mr. Bennett's work in seeing this legislation through. The two issues I just want to mention that did attract the attention of submitters were around the changes for look-through companies, or closely held companies generally, but in particular look-through companies, which are, as other speakers have said in this debate, legitimate devices for managing the affairs, particularly of small businesses and of small groupings of taxpayers. What the bill and what the officials sought to do was to ensure that look-through companies are being used appropriately, not being misused. And the committee understood that this was a small number of look-through companies that may be falling into that category. What submitters wanted to do was make sure that the tightening of the rules didn't take out those people who were legitimately using these devices. I believe we have struck that balance, and in particular through the change around the transitional provision for existing look-through companies. I think that gives an assurance to those who are using these vehicles that if they're being used legitimately at the moment, there is now a process that won't impose a burden upon those companies during the 2017-18 tax year. There were some exceptions around charities, and I do think those concerns, I suspect, will come back to the committee at a time into the future. The other major issue, Mr. Speaker, was around the changes to the net non-resident withholding tax and the approved issuer levy rules as they apply to interest paid on debt provided by non-residents. This is consistent with the changes around non-resident withholding tax that both the government and the Labor Party have proposed in the past, and I do believe they make good sense as well. So, Mr. Speaker, overall the Labor Party is happy, as we always are, to support tax legislation that gives us a fair system, that gives a system that is clear and understood by all taxpayers in it. I want to thank the officials who had quite a tough job of pulling together a number of disparate elements into one piece of legislation. I shall leave it to our colleague Andrew Bailey to describe in great depth aircraft overhaul expenses and the changes that are being made to those, because he and David Seymour...
Sorry, the member's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Alistair Scott.
Thank you.